Picture this. You're a young noble in 16th century France, nervously adjusting your silk doublet as you're escorted down torchlit corridors toward the royal chambers. The sound of your footsteps echoes off marble walls adorned with tapestries depicting ancient gods and goddesses. Your heart pounds as you realize you're about to witness something that will haunt your dreams forever. A ritual so intimate, so disturbing, that it challenges everything you thought you knew about royal power and human dignity. Tonight, you'll stand in a bedroom while a 12-year-old princess consummates her marriage to a man old enough to be her grandfather. Dozens of witnesses crowd around the ornate bed, their faces illuminated by flickering candlelight as they document every moment of what they call a sacred ceremony. The child's terrified whimpers mix with the scratching of quills on parchment as court scribes record details that will determine the fate of kingdoms. This isn't fiction. This was reality for countless souls throughout history, trapped in bedroom ceremonies so twisted that modern minds can barely comprehend their existence. Behind the golden facades of royal palaces, chambers that should have been private sanctuaries became theaters of public humiliation, political manipulation, and ritualized horror. Before diving into these forgotten chambers of suffering and power, if you enjoy uncovering the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. Please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these dark corners of the past together, from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared fascination with history's most disturbing secrets. What you're about to discover isn't just another tale of royal excess. These are stories of how absolute power transformed the most intimate spaces of human existence into instruments of control, legitimacy, and systematic abuse. The royal bedroom, that space we imagine as private and sacred, became something else entirely. A stage where political theater met human sacrifice, where children were commodified, and where the most personal moments of human existence were weaponized for dynastic gain. The bedding ceremony represents perhaps the most invasive and psychologically damaging ritual ever institutionalized by royal courts. Imagine being told from birth that your wedding night will be witnessed by dozens of strangers, that your most intimate moments will be documented by scribes, that your ability to perform sexually will determine the fate of political alliances stretching across continents. This was the reality for royal children throughout medieval and early modern Europe, where the bedroom became less a place of love and more a courtroom, where marriages were legally validated through public consummation. The practice wasn't hidden or shameful. It was celebrated as essential to proper governance. Court records from across Europe detail these ceremonies with bureaucratic precision, describing how witnesses were selected, how bedchambers were prepared, and how the evidence of consummation was documented and preserved. The bedroom during these rituals became a sacred space where private intimacy intersected with public validation, creating an environment where the most personal aspects of royal life were subjected to communal scrutiny and legal verification. But the psychological impact on the participants, particularly young brides, was devastating in ways that court chroniclers rarely acknowledged. These children, and they were children, often married at ages we would consider unconscionable today, developed lifelong trauma from having their most vulnerable moments transformed into public spectacles. The bedroom that should have represented safety and intimacy instead became associated with shame, violation, and the complete absence of personal agency. The ritual served multiple functions that went far beyond mere voyeurism. In an age where royal legitimacy depended on bloodline succession, questions of paternity could topple kingdoms. The bedding ceremony provided legal proof that marriages had been properly consummated, that any resulting children were legitimate heirs, and that political alliances sealed through matrimony were legally binding. The bedroom became a courtroom where dynastic claims were established, and where the most crucial evidence in royal succession was gathered through the systematic violation of human dignity. Consider the case of medieval Scandinavia, where laws in many Swedish provinces regarded public bedding as essential to the completion of marriage. In Iceland, a marriage was only valid if it included the bedding ritual witnessed by at least 6 men. This legal requirement demonstrates how the royal bedroom became a governmental institution, where marriages were officially validated through ceremonial witness and where private chambers were transformed into legal venues with specific protocols and requirements. The witnesses themselves were carefully selected according to complex hierarchies of power and influence. These weren't random observers, but politically significant individuals whose testimony could legitimize royal unions and whose presence served to bind various court factions to the new alliance. The bedroom during these ceremonies became a meeting place for political elites, where the most intimate moments of royal life became opportunities for networking, alliance building, and the demonstration of access to power. The Germanic traditions were particularly elaborate, involving complex musical accompaniments and choreographed movements that turned the bedroom into a stage for communal performance. Historical accounts describe how newlyweds were put to bed to the sound of pipers and drums, accompanied by what chroniclers delicately termed obscene noises, likely ritualistic chants or songs designed to encourage fertility and ward off evil spirits that might interfere with the consummation of the marriage. These musical elements transformed the bedroom into something resembling a pagan temple, where ancient fertility rituals merged with Christian marriage ceremonies to create hybrid ceremonies that drew power from multiple religious traditions. The cacophony of instruments, voices, and ritualistic sounds created an atmosphere that was simultaneously celebratory and deeply disturbing, where joy and violation existed in uncomfortable proximity. The physical preparation of the bedchamber itself involved elaborate rituals that transformed ordinary sleeping spaces into sacred theaters of political power. Beds were adorned with flowers, herbs, and other symbols of fertility and prosperity. Special linens blessed by priests were used to cover mattresses that had been consecrated through religious ceremonies. The room was decorated with tapestries depicting mythological scenes of divine unions, creating visual narratives that place the human participants within cosmic frameworks of divine approval and supernatural blessing. Incense burned continuously during these ceremonies, filling the air with scents associated with religious ritual and creating an atmosphere that was meant to invoke divine presence and blessing. The bedroom became a temple where earthly political concerns merged with spiritual validation, where human sexuality was transformed into a sacrament that served both religious and governmental purposes. The French court developed particularly sophisticated protocols for these bedroom ceremonies, with elaborate rules governing everything from the order in which witnesses entered the chamber to the specific prayers that were recited during different phases of the ritual. The bedroom became a theater with carefully scripted performances, where every gesture, word, and action carried political significance and where improvisation was not only discouraged, but potentially dangerous to the participants and witnesses alike. Louis XIII and Anne of Austria's wedding provides a particularly disturbing example of how these ceremonies could traumatize young participants. Anne was just 14 when she was subjected to the bedding ceremony, surrounded by dozens of French courtiers who documented her terror and humiliation as evidence of the marriage's legitimacy. The bedroom that night became a site of legalized assault, where a child's suffering was transformed into political capital, and where her trauma was celebrated as a victory for French diplomatic interests. The psychological preparation, or lack thereof, for these ceremonies reveals the complete disregard for human welfare that characterized royal child rearing. Young brides received minimal education about what would be expected of them, often learning about the bedding ceremony only days before their weddings. They were told that their primary duty was to submit gracefully to whatever was required, that their personal feelings were irrelevant compared to the political necessities of their unions, and that resistance or emotional breakdown would be interpreted as failure to fulfill their royal obligations. The long-term psychological consequences for survivors of these ceremonies were severe and long-lasting. Many developed what modern psychology would recognize as complex trauma, exhibiting symptoms that included chronic anxiety, depression, sexual dysfunction, and an inability to form healthy, intimate relationships. The bedroom had been so thoroughly associated with public humiliation and political manipulation that many never recovered the capacity for private intimacy or personal agency in sexual matters. Court physicians of the time documented these psychological problems, but interpreted them through the lens of their era's limited understanding of mental health. Women who exhibited signs of trauma were often diagnosed with hysteria or melancholia, conditions that were treated through methods that often compounded their original suffering. The medical establishment became complicit in the systematic abuse by pathologizing normal responses to abnormal treatment and by providing pseudoscientific justifications for continuing these harmful practices. The ripple effects of these bedroom ceremonies extended far beyond the immediate participants to affect entire royal bloodlines and political systems. Children born from unions established through such traumatic circumstances often inherited not only genetic material, but also psychological patterns of dysfunction that influence their own approaches to power, intimacy, and human relationships. The bedroom ceremonies created cycles of trauma that were passed down through generations, affecting the mental health and governance capabilities of entire royal dynasties. The practice was so normalized within royal culture that even those who experienced it firsthand often perpetuated the system when they gained power. Former victims became enforcers, subjecting their own children and grandchildren to the same rituals that had traumatized them. The bedroom ceremonies created a self-perpetuating cycle where trauma was institutionalized and where each generation trained the next to accept systematic violation as normal and necessary. The documentation of these ceremonies in official court records reveals the bureaucratic nature of the abuse, where human suffering was transformed into administrative data, and where the most intimate violations were recorded with the same clinical detachment used for recording tax collections or military campaigns. The bedroom became a site of systematic data collection, where human pain was quantified, categorized, and preserved for posterity as evidence of governmental efficiency and royal legitimacy. As we delve deeper into these dark chambers of history, we begin to understand that the royal bedroom was never truly private. It was always a political space, always subject to the demands of dynasty and state, always vulnerable to transformation from sanctuary into theater of abuse. The rituals we've begun to explore represent just the surface of a vast system of institutionalized control that touched every aspect of royal existence, and that reveals uncomfortable truths about the relationship between power and human dignity that continue to resonate in our modern world. The horrors of European bedding ceremonies pale in comparison to the ritualized brutality that unfolded in ancient Egyptian royal chambers, where pharaohs underwent daily purification rituals that transformed their private quarters into temples of divine transformation. Imagine waking before dawn in the Valley of the Kings, your body still heavy with sleep, only to be immediately surrounded by priests who strip away your nightclothes and begin scrubbing your skin with sacred oils that burn like liquid fire. This wasn't a gentle morning routine. It was a brutal daily rebirth ceremony where the pharaoh's mortal flesh was systematically purged and sanctified to prepare him for his role as a living god. The bedroom became a laboratory of transformation where human weakness was beaten out of royal bodies through ritualized violence disguised as religious devotion. Priests would use pumice stones to scrape away dead skin, their movements so aggressive that blood often mixed with the sacred oils, creating a crimson paste that they believed contained divine power. The pharaoh's bedchamber contained specialized pools filled with water from the Nile, transported hundreds of miles specifically for these purification ceremonies. But this wasn't ordinary river water. It had been blessed through rituals involving human sacrifice, where slaves were drowned in ceremonial pools so their life force could sanctify the liquid that would touch the pharaoh's skin. Every morning, the ruler of Egypt bathed in water consecrated through murder, his body absorbing the spiritual essence of those killed in his name. The psychological impact of these daily rituals was devastating. Imagine never being allowed to wake naturally, never experiencing a moment of private reflection, never having control over your own body's cleansing. From childhood, future pharaohs were conditioned to accept this systematic violation as divine privilege, trained to interpret the pain and humiliation as evidence of their sacred status. The bedroom became a site of ritualized self-destruction, where personal identity was daily sacrificed on the altar of divine kingship. The priests who conducted these ceremonies wielded enormous power over the pharaoh's most intimate moments. They decided when he would wake, how long the purification would last, which oils would be applied to which parts of his body, and what prayers would accompany each phase of the ritual. The bedroom became a space where religious authorities exercised total control over royal flesh, where the pharaoh's body belonged more to the priesthood than to himself. The tools used in these ceremonies were designed to inflict controlled suffering, while maintaining the fiction of divine blessing. Bronze scrapers with serrated edges were used to remove impurities from royal skin, leaving wounds that were then treated with salt-based compounds that caused excruciating pain while supposedly preventing infection. Heated metal implements were pressed against specific points on the pharaoh's body, creating scars that were interpreted as divine markings, but which served primarily to remind the ruler of his daily submission to priestly authority. The aromatic substances applied during these rituals contained psychoactive compounds that altered the pharaoh's mental state, creating a drug-induced compliance that made resistance psychologically impossible. The bedroom filled with smoke from burning herbs that contained natural opiates, creating an atmosphere where pain and pleasure became indistinguishable, and where the pharaoh lost the ability to distinguish between voluntary participation and coerced submission. These morning purification rituals were just the beginning of a day filled with ceremonial obligations that transformed every aspect of royal existence into performance art. The pharaoh couldn't eat, speak, or even urinate without following specific protocols that had been established through centuries of religious tradition. The bedroom represented the only space where he might have expected privacy, yet it became the most controlled and monitored environment in his entire existence. The political implications of these bedroom rituals were enormous. By controlling the pharaoh's most intimate moments, the priesthood effectively controlled the entire kingdom. They could manipulate his mental state through the substances applied during purification, influence his decision-making through the prayers and suggestions whispered during vulnerable moments, and ensure his compliance through the systematic breaking down of personal boundaries that began each day in his private chambers. The documentation of these rituals in hieroglyphic texts reveals the clinical precision with which human dignity was systematically destroyed. Temple records detail the exact mixtures of oils and drugs to be used, the specific prayers to be recited during different phases of the ceremony, and the methods for determining whether the purification had been successful. The bedroom became a laboratory where human psychology was studied and manipulated with scientific precision thousands of years before modern psychology existed. But perhaps most disturbing was how these bedroom rituals created a model for governance that spread throughout the ancient world. Other cultures adopted similar practices, creating systems where rulers were systematically broken down and rebuilt through ritualized abuse disguised as religious devotion. The Egyptian pharaoh's bedroom became a template for authoritarian control that influenced royal practices across civilizations and continents. The physical transformation of pharaohs through these daily rituals was dramatic and permanent. Years of aggressive scrubbing, chemical treatments, and ritualized scarification left their bodies marked with the evidence of their systematic abuse. Archaeological examination of royal mummies reveals skin damage consistent with chronic chemical burns, repetitive trauma patterns, and evidence of malnutrition caused by the dietary restrictions that accompanied the purification ceremonies. The psychological effects were equally severe and long-lasting. Pharaohs who survived these daily rituals often exhibited symptoms that modern psychiatry would recognize as complex trauma disorders. They became dissociated from their own physical experiences, unable to distinguish between pain and pleasure, incapable of forming normal emotional attachments, and completely dependent on the religious authorities who controlled their daily existence. The priests justified these practices through elaborate theological explanations that portrayed the pharaoh's suffering as cosmic necessity. They taught that the divine essence could only inhabit a body that had been purged of all human weakness, that the pain of purification was evidence of spiritual transformation, and that resistance to the rituals represented rebellion against the gods themselves. The bedroom became a site where theological doctrine was literally inscribed on royal flesh through systematic torture disguised as worship. The ripple effects of these bedroom ceremonies extended throughout Egyptian society, creating a culture where systematic abuse was normalized and where those in power were expected to endure ritualized suffering as proof of their legitimacy. Citizens who witnessed the pharaoh's daily purification ceremonies learned that authority came through the acceptance of pain, that leadership required the sacrifice of personal dignity, and that power was always purchased through systematic self-destruction. The architectural design of pharaonic bedchambers reflects the ritualistic nature of these daily ceremonies. Special drainage systems were built to handle the blood and fluids that resulted from the purification rituals. Walls were covered with hieroglyphic instructions detailing proper procedures for each phase of the ceremony. Secret passages allowed priests to enter and exit without being seen by other palace inhabitants, maintaining the fiction that the pharaoh's transformation was a divine mystery rather than a systematic program of abuse. The tools and implements used in these bedroom rituals were crafted with artistic beauty that masked their brutal functionality. Golden scrapers inlaid with precious stones were designed to inflict maximum pain while maintaining aesthetic appeal. Ceremonial bowls made from exotic materials were used to collect the blood and fluids that resulted from the purification process, transforming the evidence of abuse into sacred relics that were preserved in temple treasuries. As Egyptian civilization evolved, these bedroom rituals became even more elaborate and psychologically sophisticated. Later dynasties added elements of sensory deprivation, where pharaohs would be blindfolded during portions of the purification ceremony, creating disorientation that made resistance impossible. Sound was manipulated through the use of specific architectural acoustics that amplified the pharaoh's cries while muffling external noise, creating an isolation chamber effect within the bedroom itself. The training of priests who conducted these bedroom ceremonies was extensive and specialized, requiring years of study in human psychology, anatomy, and the precise application of controlled trauma. These religious officials became experts in breaking down human resistance while maintaining the subject's physical functionality, developing techniques that would later influence torture methods used by military and political organizations throughout history. The legacy of these Egyptian bedroom rituals extends far beyond ancient history, establishing patterns of ritualized abuse that would be adopted and adapted by royal courts throughout the world. The fundamental principle that legitimate authority requires the systematic destruction of personal dignity became a cornerstone of authoritarian governance that continues to influence power structures in our modern world. But Egypt was not alone in transforming royal bedrooms into sites of ritualized horror. Across the ancient world, civilizations developed their own methods for using the most intimate spaces of royal existence as theaters for systematic abuse, creating a global network of bedroom-based trauma that shaped the development of human civilization in ways we are only beginning to understand. The practice spread eastward like a contagion of systematic cruelty, finding its most refined expression in the imperial courts of Japan, where royal bedrooms became sites of mystical transformation so elaborate and psychologically invasive that they make Egyptian purification rituals seem almost merciful by comparison. Picture yourself as a young imperial prince in 8th century Kyoto, awakening not to gentle sunlight filtering through silk screens, but to the sound of dozens of court officials filing silently into your private chambers, their faces hidden behind ceremonial masks that transform them into anonymous agents of imperial protocol. You're not allowed to move from your sleeping mat until specific astronomical calculations have been completed by court astronomers, who consult star charts to determine the precise moment when your transition from sleep to wakefulness will be most auspicious for the empire. Your body becomes a cosmic instrument, your most basic biological functions, subject to the movements of celestial bodies that you'll never be allowed to observe directly. The bedroom transforms into an observatory where human autonomy is sacrificed to astronomical precision. The Mikado's daily awakening ceremony required the construction of temporary wooden structures within the imperial bedchamber, creating a maze of screens and platforms that divided the space into multiple ritual zones. Each zone served a specific function in the transformation process, from the purification area where the emperor's sleeping garments were removed and burned, to the divination space where priests interpreted the patterns of his breathing during sleep to predict the empire's future. But the most disturbing aspect of these Japanese bedroom rituals was their integration of food consumption into the sacred space of sleep. The emperor was required to eat specially prepared rice while still lying on his sleeping mat, fed by attendants whose hands had been ritually purified through ceremonies involving the systematic mutilation of their fingertips. The bedroom became a dining hall where consumption was transformed into sacrament, where the most basic human need for nourishment was weaponized as a tool of spiritual control. The rice itself had been grown in fields watered with the blood of executed criminals, harvested by workers who had undergone ritual castration to ensure their spiritual purity, and prepared through cooking processes that required the sacrifice of specific animals at predetermined astrological moments. Every grain that entered the emperor's mouth in his bedroom carried the spiritual weight of systematic violence, transforming his most intimate space into a site where murder and consumption merged into divine ceremony. The psychological conditioning required to participate in these bedroom rituals began in infancy, with future emperors trained from birth to associate their most basic needs with elaborate ceremonial protocols. They learned to sleep only when permitted, to wake only when commanded, to eat only what had been sanctified through violence, and to interpret their complete lack of personal agency as evidence of their divine status. The bedroom became a training ground where human will was systematically destroyed and replaced with ritualized compliance. The court officials who supervised these bedroom ceremonies wielded power that extended far beyond religious authority into the realm of psychological manipulation. They controlled every aspect of the emperor's physical existence, from the temperature of the air he breathed to the texture of the fabrics that touched his skin. The bedroom became a laboratory where human sensory experience was carefully calibrated to produce specific emotional and spiritual responses. The architectural design of imperial bedrooms reflected this obsession with control, featuring hidden passages that allowed observers to monitor the emperor's sleep patterns, adjustable ventilation systems that could introduce specific scents and vapors into the sleeping environment, and acoustic properties that amplified certain sounds while dampening others. The bedroom became a machine designed to manufacture compliance, where every environmental factor was engineered to reinforce the emperor's dependence on courtly authority. The documentation of these bedroom rituals in court records reveals a level of systematic dehumanization that surpasses even the most brutal practices of other civilizations. Officials recorded the emperor's breathing patterns during sleep, documented the content and frequency of his dreams, and maintained detailed logs of his physical responses to various ceremonial stimuli. The bedroom became a research facility where human psychology was studied and manipulated with scientific precision that wouldn't be matched by Western civilization for another 1,000 years. But perhaps most chilling was the integration of family members into these bedroom ceremonies, where imperial children were forced to witness and participate in the systematic abuse of their parents and siblings. Young princes and princesses learned that love was conditional on ceremonial compliance, that family bonds could be severed through ritual protocols, and that their own survival depended on their willingness to perpetuate the system that was destroying their humanity. The empress underwent parallel bedroom ceremonies that were even more invasive and psychologically damaging than those imposed on the emperor. Her sleeping chambers were transformed into medical theaters where court physicians monitored her reproductive cycles, documented her fertility patterns, and subjected her to treatments designed to optimize her capacity for producing male heirs. The imperial bedroom became a breeding laboratory, where human sexuality was reduced to its purely functional aspects. The tools used in these empress ceremonies included devices for internal examination that were designed to cause maximum discomfort while gathering information about her reproductive status. Her sleep was interrupted regularly for physical inspections that violated every boundary of personal dignity, and her dreams were interpreted by court officials as prophetic messages about the empire's future. The bedroom became a space where the most intimate aspects of female experience were transformed into state intelligence. The ripple effects of these Japanese bedroom rituals extended throughout the imperial court, creating a culture where systematic abuse was not only normalized, but celebrated as evidence of spiritual refinement. Courtiers competed for the privilege of participating in these ceremonies, viewing their involvement in imperial abuse as a mark of social status and religious devotion. The bedroom became a theater where complicity in systematic violence was transformed into cultural achievement. The psychological impact on imperial family members was devastating and permanent. Archaeological evidence from imperial tombs suggests that many emperors and empresses died young from stress-related illnesses, their bodies showing signs of chronic malnutrition and chemical poisoning consistent with the substances used in their daily bedroom ceremonies. The systematic abuse disguised as religious devotion literally consumed the lives of those it claimed to honor. The influence of these Japanese bedroom rituals spread throughout East Asia, inspiring similar practices in Chinese, Korean, and Southeast Asian royal courts. The fundamental principle that legitimate authority required the complete surrender of personal agency became a cornerstone of imperial governance that shaped Asian political culture for centuries. The bedroom became a template for authoritarian control that influenced power structures across an entire continent. Moving westward into the Byzantine Empire, we encounter bedroom ceremonies that combined the psychological sophistication of Asian practices with the theological complexity of Christian doctrine, creating hybrid rituals that were perhaps the most psychologically devastating of all ancient royal bedroom practices. The imperial palace in Constantinople housed bedrooms that were simultaneously private chambers and public theaters, where the most intimate moments of imperial life were subject to religious interpretation and political manipulation. The Byzantine emperor's bedroom was never truly private, containing hidden galleries where court officials and religious authorities could observe and document every aspect of imperial sleep and intimacy. The emperor learned from childhood that his most private moments were subject to theological interpretation, that his dreams would be analyzed for prophetic content, and that his physical responses during sleep would be used to determine imperial policy. The bedroom became a surveillance apparatus where human privacy was systematically eliminated in service of governmental control. The empress's bedroom ceremonies were even more invasive, involving daily examinations by court physicians who documented her fertility cycles, monitored her physical health, and subjected her to treatments designed to ensure the production of male heirs. These medical interventions were conducted in the presence of religious officials who interpreted her physical responses as divine messages about the empire's spiritual health. The bedroom became a medical theater where female autonomy was sacrificed to dynastic necessity. The integration of Christian theology into these bedroom rituals created a particularly insidious form of psychological manipulation, where systematic abuse was justified through elaborate religious explanations. The emperor and empress were taught that their suffering was redemptive, that their loss of privacy was a form of martyrdom, and that their compliance with invasive ceremonies was evidence of their spiritual devotion. The bedroom became a site where theological doctrine was used to rationalize systematic torture. The court officials who supervised these Byzantine bedroom ceremonies were trained in both religious theology and practical psychology, developing techniques for breaking down human resistance while maintaining the fiction of divine blessing. They learned to interpret physical responses, manipulate emotional states, and create psychological dependencies that ensured imperial compliance. The bedroom became a training ground for authoritarian control techniques that would influence political systems for centuries. But the true horror of these Byzantine bedroom rituals lay in their integration with imperial governance, where the systematic abuse of royal family members was directly connected to policy decisions affecting millions of subjects throughout the empire. The emperor's compliance with bedroom ceremonies determined his access to governmental authority, while resistance resulted in political isolation and potential deposition. The bedroom became the center of imperial power, where personal dignity was traded for political authority. As we examine these diverse traditions of royal bedroom abuse across different civilizations and time periods, a disturbing pattern emerges that reveals uncomfortable truths about the relationship between power and human dignity that continue to resonate in our modern world. The systematic transformation of intimate spaces into theaters of control represents more than historical curiosity. It provides insight into the fundamental mechanisms through which authority structures perpetuate themselves by destroying the humanity of those they claim to serve. The systematic destruction of human dignity through bedroom rituals reached its most sophisticated and terrifying expression in the courts of pre-Columbian America, where Maya and Aztec rulers underwent ceremonies that make European bedding rituals seem almost benign by comparison. Picture yourself as a noble witness in the jade-adorned chambers of Palenque, watching in frozen horror as your god-king performs acts of self-mutilation, so extreme that the very walls seem to weep with the blood that spatters across intricate stone carvings. The Maya royal bloodletting ceremonies transformed bedrooms into temples of systematic self-destruction, where rulers were expected to pierce their own tongues, genitals, and earlobes with obsidian blades while court scribes documented every drop of blood that fell onto bark paper. But this wasn't a quick ritual. These ceremonies lasted for hours, sometimes days, as the king methodically destroyed his own flesh while maintaining the composure expected of divine leadership. The bedroom became a torture chamber where the victim was also the executioner, where royal authority was demonstrated through the willingness to inflict unimaginable pain upon oneself. The psychological conditioning required to participate in these rituals began in childhood, with future rulers trained from infancy to associate their own suffering with cosmic necessity. They learned that their blood was literally the substance that kept the universe functioning, that their pain prevented the collapse of reality itself. The implements used in these bedroom bloodletting ceremonies were crafted with artistic beauty that masked their brutal functionality. Obsidian lancets, sharper than modern surgical steel, were embedded in handles carved from human bone, creating tools that could slice through flesh with terrifying precision while serving as works of art worthy of museum display. The bedroom walls were adorned with murals depicting previous rulers performing similar acts of self-destruction, creating a visual narrative that normalized extreme violence as royal duty. But the true horror lay in the religious interpretation of these bedroom ceremonies, where the ruler's ability to endure systematic self-mutilation was seen as evidence of divine favor and cosmic alignment. Court priests taught that the gods required human suffering to maintain the balance of the universe, that royal blood possessed unique properties that could influence weather patterns, crop yields, and military victories. The bedroom became a cosmic control center, where human agony was transformed into divine power. The hallucinogenic substances administered during these ceremonies compounded the psychological trauma, creating altered states of consciousness where pain and ecstasy became indistinguishable. The rulers were given powerful drugs derived from psilocybin mushrooms, morning glory seeds, and various toxic plants that created visions interpreted as direct communication with divine forces. The bedroom became a pharmacological laboratory where consciousness was systematically altered to make extreme self-abuse psychologically tolerable. The documentation of these rituals in Maya codices reveals the clinical precision with which human psychology was manipulated through systematic trauma. Court scribes recorded not only the physical details of the bloodletting, but also the ruler's emotional responses, the content of drug-induced visions, and the supposed cosmic effects of each ceremony. The bedroom became a research facility where the relationship between physical pain and spiritual authority was studied with scientific rigor. The political implications were enormous, as rulers who survived these bedroom ceremonies gained enormous credibility with their subjects, who interpreted their willingness to endure extreme suffering as proof of their divine nature. But those who showed weakness, who flinched or cried out during the rituals, could lose their authority entirely. The bedroom became a testing ground where royal legitimacy was literally carved into flesh through systematic self-destruction. The ripple effects extended throughout Maya society, creating a culture where systematic self-abuse was celebrated as the highest form of religious devotion. Citizens who witnessed these bedroom ceremonies learned that true leadership required the willingness to destroy oneself for cosmic purposes. That authority came through the acceptance of unimaginable pain, and that resistance to suffering represented rebellion against divine order. The architectural design of Maya royal bedrooms reflected this obsession with ritualized violence, featuring drainage systems to handle the massive blood loss, ventilation systems to clear the smoke from burning blood-soaked paper, and acoustic properties that amplified the sounds of suffering throughout the palace complex. The bedroom became a broadcasting station where royal agony was transmitted as political theater designed to inspire awe and terror in equal measure. The training of court officials who supervised these bedroom ceremonies required expertise in human anatomy, pharmacology, and psychological manipulation. These priests learned to judge precisely how much blood loss a ruler could survive, which combinations of drugs would produce desired visionary states, and how to interpret physical responses as divine messages. The bedroom became a medical theater where the boundaries between healing and torture were deliberately obscured. But perhaps most disturbing was the integration of family members into these bedroom ceremonies, where royal children were forced to witness their parents' systematic self-destruction as part of their education in divine kingship. Young princes and princesses learned that love required the willingness to watch suffering without intervention, that family bonds were secondary to cosmic necessity, and that their own future survival depended on their ability to inflict similar violence upon themselves. The empress underwent parallel bedroom ceremonies that were specifically designed to optimize her reproductive capacity through controlled trauma. Court physicians believed that carefully administered pain could influence fertility, that bloodletting at specific anatomical locations could ensure the production of male heirs, and that drug-induced visions could provide guidance about optimal conception timing. The bedroom became a reproductive laboratory where female biology was manipulated through systematic abuse. The psychological impact on royal family members was catastrophic and permanent. Archaeological evidence from Maya royal tombs reveals patterns of healed wounds, consistent with chronic self-mutilation, skeletal deformities caused by repeated blood loss, and chemical residues indicating chronic drug use. The systematic abuse disguised as religious devotion literally consumed the bodies and minds of those it claimed to empower. The influence of these Maya bedroom rituals spread throughout Mesoamerica, inspiring similar practices in Aztec, Zapotec, and other indigenous royal courts. The fundamental principle that legitimate authority required the willingness to destroy oneself for cosmic purposes became a cornerstone of pre-Columbian governance that shaped political culture across the Americas. Moving northward to the Aztec Empire, we encounter bedroom ceremonies that combined Maya bloodletting traditions with their own innovations in systematic royal abuse. The imperial palace in Tenochtitlan housed bedrooms that were simultaneously private chambers and cosmic observatories, where the emperor's sleep patterns were monitored for prophetic content, and his dreams were interpreted as divine communications about imperial policy. The Aztec emperor's bedroom was never truly private, containing hidden alcoves where court priests could observe and document every aspect of imperial rest and intimacy. The emperor learned from childhood that his most private moments carried cosmic significance, that his sleeping position could influence weather patterns, and that his dreams would be analyzed for guidance about military campaigns and agricultural policies. The bedroom became a divination center where human privacy was sacrificed to governmental necessity. The integration of human sacrifice into these bedroom ceremonies created a particularly horrific form of psychological conditioning, where the emperor was required to sleep, surrounded by the freshly severed hearts of sacrificial victims. These organs were arranged around his bed according to specific astronomical patterns, creating a grotesque mandala of human remains that was believed to channel divine energy into the sleeping ruler. The bedroom became a charnel house where death and rest merged into nightmare. The court officials who supervised these Aztec bedroom ceremonies were trained in astronomy, human anatomy, and the precise timing of sacrificial rituals. They learned to interpret the emperor's sleep patterns as cosmic messages, to coordinate bedroom ceremonies with celestial events, and to maintain the steady supply of human hearts required for nightly rituals. The bedroom became an administrative center where systematic murder was organized with bureaucratic efficiency. The documentation of these practices in Aztec codices reveals a level of systematic dehumanization that surpasses even the most brutal practices of other civilizations. Officials recorded not only the details of bedroom ceremonies, but also the sources of sacrificial victims, the astronomical conditions during each ritual, and the supposed effects on imperial health and governmental effectiveness. The bedroom became a research facility where the relationship between human sacrifice and political power was studied with clinical precision. But the true legacy of these Mesoamerican bedroom rituals extends far beyond their historical context, establishing patterns of systematic abuse that would influence power structures throughout the Americas and beyond. The fundamental principle that legitimate authority required the willingness to participate in or oversee systematic violence became embedded in political cultures that would shape human civilization for centuries. The psychological techniques developed at these ancient bedroom ceremonies, the use of drugs to alter consciousness, the manipulation of environmental factors to create psychological dependency, the integration of family members into systematic abuse, would be adapted and refined by authoritarian regimes throughout history. The bedroom became a laboratory where methods of human control were perfected and passed down through generations of political operators. The architectural innovations pioneered in these royal bedrooms, hidden observation spaces, specialized drainage systems, acoustic manipulation, environmental controls, would influence the design of prisons, interrogation facilities, and other spaces designed for systematic human control. The bedroom became a prototype for institutional abuse that would be replicated in contexts ranging from medieval dungeons to modern black sites. The religious justifications developed to rationalize these bedroom ceremonies, the transformation of systematic abuse into cosmic necessity, the interpretation of human suffering as divine communication, the presentation of victim compliance as spiritual achievement, would be adopted by religious and political authorities seeking to legitimize their own systems of control. The bedroom became a theological laboratory where methods of spiritual manipulation were developed and refined. As we examine these diverse traditions of bedroom-based systematic abuse across different civilizations and time periods, we begin to understand that these practices represent more than historical curiosities. They reveal fundamental patterns in how power structures perpetuate themselves through the systematic destruction of human dignity in the most intimate spaces of human existence. The transformation of bedrooms from spaces of rest and intimacy into theaters of control and abuse represents a universal tendency in authoritarian systems to colonize every aspect of human experience, to ensure that no space remains free from the demands of power, and to use the most private moments of human existence as opportunities for demonstrating and reinforcing hierarchical control. These ancient bedroom ceremonies established templates for systematic abuse that continue to influence modern power structures in ways that we are only beginning to recognize and understand. The techniques developed in royal bedrooms thousands of years ago, psychological manipulation, environmental control, the weaponization of intimacy, the transformation of private spaces into sites of systematic abuse, remain visible in contemporary institutions ranging from military organizations to corporate hierarchies to religious institutions. The legacy of these dark rituals reminds us that the bedroom, that space we consider most private and sacred, has always been vulnerable to colonization by power structures seeking to demonstrate their authority over every aspect of human existence. Understanding these historical patterns becomes crucial for recognizing and resisting similar tendencies in our own time, where technology and institutional sophistication have created new opportunities for the systematic invasion of private spaces and the transformation of intimacy into instruments of control. The parallels between these ancient bedroom horrors and modern systems of control become chillingly apparent when we examine how contemporary institutions have adapted these same fundamental techniques for new purposes. Walk into any modern military academy, corporate training facility, or high-security psychiatric ward, and you'll find spaces designed according to principles first perfected in those blood-soaked royal chambers thousands of years ago. The controlled environment, the systematic invasion of privacy, the transformation of basic human needs into opportunities for demonstrating submission, these elements persist in sanitized forms that mask their origins in systematic royal abuse. Modern interrogation techniques rely heavily on environmental manipulation, sleep deprivation, and the weaponization of intimacy in ways that would be immediately recognizable to ancient court officials who supervised bedroom ceremonies. The pharmaceutical industry has refined the drug-based consciousness manipulation pioneered in Maya royal chambers, developing chemical compounds that can alter perception, suppress resistance, and create psychological dependencies with precision that ancient priests could only dream of achieving. Mental health institutions routinely employ isolation techniques and environmental controls that mirror the bedroom-based psychological conditioning used to break royal spirits in civilizations across the globe. Corporate culture has adopted the surveillance methods first developed to monitor sleeping emperors, creating workplace environments where privacy is systematically eliminated and where personal behavior is subject to constant observation and analysis. The open office plan, the mandatory team-building exercises, the performance reviews that probe into personal relationships, all of these represent modern adaptations of techniques, first perfected in royal bedrooms designed to eliminate personal autonomy. Educational institutions have embraced the childhood conditioning methods used to prepare future rulers for systematic abuse, creating environments where students learn that their most intimate thoughts and behaviors are subject to institutional control. The psychological techniques used to make children accept invasive bedroom ceremonies as normal have been refined into modern pedagogical methods that teach compliance through systematic boundary violation. Religious organizations continue to employ the theological justifications developed to rationalize royal bedroom abuse, transforming systematic invasion of privacy into evidence of spiritual devotion and presenting institutional control over intimate aspects of human existence as divine mandate. The confession booth, the mandatory counseling session, the spiritual retreat that isolates participants from outside support. These practices echo the religious frameworks used to legitimize ancient bedroom ceremonies. Technology has created new opportunities for the systematic invasion of intimate spaces that surpass anything imagined by ancient royal courts. Smart home devices that monitor sleep patterns, social media platforms that analyze private communications, fitness trackers that document biological functions. These innovations represent the ultimate realization of the surveillance systems first developed to monitor royal bedrooms. The normalization of these practices through cultural conditioning mirrors the processes used to make ancient societies accept systematic royal abuse as necessary for cosmic order. We learn to interpret the invasion of our privacy as convenience, the monitoring of our intimate behaviors as security, and the systematic elimination of personal autonomy as progress. The bedroom ceremonies have evolved, but their fundamental purpose remains unchanged. Perhaps most disturbing is how these modern adaptations of ancient bedroom abuse techniques have been democratized, extending beyond elite populations to affect entire societies. While ancient systematic abuse was largely confined to royal families and their immediate circles, contemporary institutions have developed methods for applying similar techniques to millions of people simultaneously through technology, media manipulation, and institutional design. The psychological impact on modern populations mirrors the trauma experienced by ancient royal families subjected to systematic bedroom abuse. Rates of anxiety, depression, and dissociative disorders have reached epidemic proportions in societies that have most thoroughly adopted these modernized control techniques. The systematic invasion of intimate spaces continues to produce the same psychological destruction it generated in ancient courts, but on a scale that encompasses entire civilizations. The resistance techniques developed by ancient royal victims also find modern parallels in contemporary movements for privacy rights, personal autonomy, and institutional accountability. Understanding the historical patterns of bedroom-based systematic abuse provides crucial insight into recognizing and countering similar tendencies in our own time, where the stakes may be even higher than they were for individual royal families in ancient civilizations. The documentation of these historical practices serves not merely as academic curiosity, but as urgent warning about the persistent human tendency to transform intimate spaces into instruments of control. The royal bedrooms of the past were laboratories where techniques of systematic abuse were perfected and refined, techniques that continue to influence power structures in our modern world in ways that we are only beginning to recognize and understand. The children who were torn from their families to serve as court pages, the young brides subjected to public violation, the rulers broken through systematic self-destruction, their suffering was not meaningless if it helps us recognize and resist similar patterns in our own time. Their voices, silenced by centuries of institutional power, still echo through history with a simple but crucial message. Beware of any system that seeks to colonize your most intimate spaces, that transforms your private moments into opportunities for demonstrating submission that presents the systematic invasion of human dignity as necessary for social order. The dark rituals of ancient royal bedrooms may seem like relics of a barbaric past, but their legacy lives on in every institution that seeks to control human behavior through the systematic elimination of privacy, every technology that transforms intimate spaces into sites of surveillance, and every cultural norm that teaches us to accept the invasion of our personal boundaries as normal and necessary. As we close this journey through history's darkest chambers, we must confront an uncomfortable truth. The bedroom was never truly private, never fully safe from the demands of power structures seeking to demonstrate their authority over every aspect of human existence. The challenge for our modern world is to recognize these patterns, resist their influence, and create genuine spaces of intimacy and autonomy that remain free from the systematic abuse that has characterized so much of human history. The royal bedrooms of the past were sites where human dignity was systematically destroyed in service of political power. Understanding their legacy becomes crucial for ensuring that the bedrooms of the future remain spaces of genuine privacy, authentic intimacy, and human dignity. Spaces where the dark rituals of systematic control can never again take root in the soil of human vulnerability. The ghosts of those ancient chambers still whisper their warnings across the centuries, reminding us that eternal vigilance is the price of preserving the intimate spaces where our humanity can flourish free from the demands of those who would transform our most private moments into theaters of systematic control. Their suffering was not in vain if it helps us recognize and resist the persistent human tendency to weaponize intimacy in service of power.